A very warm welcome, everyone, to today's session. Now, today's webinar is titled Mindfulness for Leadership Takeaways from Implementing Mindfulness in the UK Parliament, and an intimate conversation with Chris Ruane. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, great to be here.
So, a brief introduction about Chris. Many of you may already know, you may have Googled, and some of you may not even have to Google because Chris is a person quite well known in the mindfulness movement across the globe. But nevertheless, I will just attempt to give a very brief introduction about Chris and his background. So, Chris was a member of the UK Parliament for 21 years. In 2013, he set up free mindfulness classes in the UK Parliament. Since then, more than 150 British members of parliament and peers have received mindfulness training, along with 250 members of their staff. In 2014, he and Professor Lord Richard Layard established the Mindfulness All-Party Parliamentary Group, a cross-party group dedicated to developing public policy on mindfulness in health, education, criminal justice, and the workplace. He was active in producing and publicizing two reports, Mindful Nation UK report and Mindfulness in the Workplace. So as you can see, with such an esteemed background and experience, we are going to learn so much from the conversations that we're going to have today. And with me, I have Albert Tiong from the Center for Mindfulness. He leads the Singapore, Malaysia, and Vietnam operations. And I have Nikhila Sharma, who leads the India operations. And my name is Kathirasan K, and I am the founder of the Center for Mindfulness Global Group. Now, for those of you who are in the room today, I would like to share with you some digital mindfulness routines. And one of it is to keep the microphones on mute throughout the session. And also, if you have a question that may arise or that may emerge during this conversation, we would like to invite you to type that question in the chat. And Albert, Nikhila, and myself would pick up your questions and we will bring it into the room if it is aligned with the topic of today's conversation. And this webinar will be recorded and will be uploaded to the Center for Mindfulness YouTube page in a short time so that many can learn from the insights gathered from the conversation with Chris. With that, let's begin the conversation with Chris. And Chris, welcome. How are you feeling today and to be in this webinar?
I'm feeling great. I was up early and I've been meditating for an hour or 3/4 of an hour. I'm preparing for this wonderful opportunity to speak on my parliamentary experiences for your organisation. So I'm up for it.
Thank you, Chris. We are very excited too because we have read so much, and I got the opportunity to read an article in the Mindful magazine that featured you as well in the recent issue, and it's it's a delight to have read it, and that also inspired some of the questions that we're going to bring into the room today. And here's my first question. Now, many of us discover mindfulness through various ways or through various people or sometimes through books. How was your experience? What brought you to mindfulness? Very curious. What was the journey? How was your journey into the world of mindfulness? That's basically the question here.
Well, I had two journeys. The first was the journey into meditation in 1987. I used to be a primary school teacher, a vice principal, deputy head, and our school was being inspected by Her Majesty's inspectors. And the staff got the jitters. The head teacher called in the school nurse, and the school nurse taught us tension and release and some breathing. And I used that with the children in my class, and it's a great effect. It would calm them down from a wet and windy playtime. They'd come in within 1 minute of sitting and breathing. Their attention and focus was back in the room. And then I used that for 2 or 3 years. And then about 14 years ago, when I was a member of parliament, I was helping my then 13-year-old daughter with her homework, compatible religions around the world. And I read about Buddhism and the centrality of the mindfulness practice. And I practiced it on podcasts going down to Parliament and back on the train. And it was the kind of philosophical talks as well as the actual practical meditations. And it worked for me. So I practiced by myself 6 years, developing that practice, and I've been practicing ever since. So that's a brief synopsis of my journey into meditation.
Like, I'm very curious to know if there was a very specific desire that you had, or maybe an outcome that you were looking for when you approach this with full commitment. Like, you know, in our, you know, in my experience, people tell me that I approached mindfulness because I wanted purpose and meaning, and then some people tell me, no, 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 I learned mindfulness because I was stressed, right? So I know you shared with me some context behind what motivated you, but I would like to know, were there any specific expectations that you had over the practice or over meditation and mindfulness generally?
I think people come to mindfulness for different reasons. Some come to rebalance themselves because they're stressed. Some have read articles on how mindfulness can help you with your focus and your attention, the prefrontal cortex. Some people come to mindfulness from a spiritual perspective. And we have a wonderful teacher in Parliament called Chris Cullen, and he said that different people come for different reasons to mindfulness. But what they get when they arrive there is not necessarily what they thought they would get. And he used this beautiful saying, mindfulness doesn't come in through the front door, it bubbles up through the floorboards. And I think it can bring different things at different times of life. But and I've often thought what it was for me, because my wife said, "You're one of the happiest people I know, Chris. Why are you going inwards? You might not like what you find." But I have liked what I've found, and it hasn't taken me down, it's taken me up. And it's been a big boon. It's altered my life and my outlook to life.
Not trying to pry, you know, pry into
Right on my
your yeah, exactly. But I'm very curious, what did you find actually? So because I think there's a direct correlation between the commitment to the practice and what you possibly discovered. But if it is okay for you to share, like, what were some things that you discovered about yourself?
I found this this insight only came to light about 3 years ago. I'd been to a conference in London. I think it was mindfulness in the workplace. I was speaking only for 5 minutes. I came downstairs, had a cup of tea with my wife and the organizer, Jamie Bristow, who is the co-director of the Mindfulness Initiative. And he said, "Chris, you've got ADD." What? He said, "I know because members of my family have got it and you've got it." And then my wife said, "Yes, he has." So all my life I have been kind of, and I think what I got out from it, and I practiced it for 13 years without realizing it until this occasion, is stillness and quietness, stillness, and just to be able to regulate myself from this kind of hyperactive stage. My wife said I haven't got ADHD. She says I've dropped the hyperactivity in my 60s, but I think that's what I've got. But I've had different things as well for me. My awareness, my affinity to nature, a whole range of softer skills. And I think that's down to mindfulness. It might be part of the aging process, or it's probably the two mixing together. But I've gained many things. My focus, especially early in the morning, is really sharp. And my spirituality has increased as well. I'm a practicing Catholic, and it's helped me with my spirituality. So many benefits, many gifts to the mind, body, and soul.
Yes, indeed. And thank you so much for sharing about your background and, what are some of the things that came up for you personally. And I especially love the beautiful metaphor that you used about, mindfulness bubbling up from the floor and the way it impacts us in different ways. So thank you so much for sharing that, Chris. And just, building up on this and for the benefit of everybody who's here. So based on your experience, how would you define mindfulness for those who are new to the concept, probably? Yeah.
Well, there are different variations of mindfulness. There's the John Kabat-Zinn classic quote, or scientific quote of paying attention on purpose, using the body as an anchor. But the way it was explained to us in Parliament back in 2013 was by Professor Mark Williams. Now, Mark is a special, wonderful person. He is one of three scientists, Zindel Ziegel, Mark Williams, and John Teasdale, who in 2004 proved to the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, which is the overseeing body for the British National Health Service, that mindfulness was as good as antidepressants to treat repeat episodic depression. So those are his scientific qualifications. He's also a practicing Anglican priest, so he has a foot in either camp. And he came to Parliament and he explained it like this, and he uses his hands, and I've tried to copy him over the years by using my hand. I'll take it back a little bit further so you can see. He said, this is the mind and this is the body. He said, the mind and body need to be in the same place at the same time for whatever is before you, to pay full attention to. And he said, but many people live their life like this, their body in the present moment, their mind in the past. I added this, and it kind of goes round and round and ruminates and cogitates and thinks. And that means you're missing whatever is in front of you. But to bring the body, use the breath or the body as an anchor to bring you back. So whatever is in front of you, you are paying attention to, full attention to. He also said that some people live their lives like this, their body in the present moment, their mind in the future, and they're planning what they're going to do. And again, they're missing what's in front of them here. And to use the body or the breath to come back to the present moment. So that's how it was explained to me. That's how I explain it. I can explain that to children, to adults. I think most people can appreciate that most of the time. And it's been actually calculated by Harvard in 2011. They sent people beeper messages. What are you thinking about now? To thousands of people. And 47% of people were either in the past or in the future and missing the present. And as John Kabat-Zinn said when he spoke in Parliament, he said, just imagine if you're given a gift where you could reclaim half of your life, the half of your life that is wasted in the past or in the future, gone, and here's a gift that can bring it back. There's nothing wrong with the past as long as you want to be there on purpose, as John would say, in the moment, or the future on purpose. But just to have it drift willy-nilly, it might not be the way you want to live.
Very interesting indeed, and thank you for sharing it. Also using a part of the body itself, the arm example, it was wonderful to understand how it is working for us. So thank you for sharing that, Chris. And just to probe a little bit further into the definition itself. So when we are talking about being in the present, we are talking about essentially the present moment awareness, right? So what in your experience is one of probably a parallel attitude that might be very helpful for a person who's practicing mindfulness?
Sorry, can you ask that last bit again?
Sure. So what would be another attitude along with this present moment awareness? So for example, I'm aware in the present moment what is happening with me. I've brought my body and mind in this moment. So what would be something else, an attitude that would be very helpful for me to cultivate to make the best out of this present moment awareness?
For me, the present moment awareness is the key to unlocking all of the other gifts of mindfulness. The gift of noticing tiny, it might be just a different in light and shade or color, shadow, reflection. The gift of attention leads to greater emotions because you're looking at a person's face. In politics, quite often you can go into a room and there are people there, many people in the room, and somebody's looking at you, and then they start going like this to look behind you to see who's more important. And really the most important thing in the world is the thing that's in front of you now. If you take a deliberate decision to move away from that thing, that's all well and good. But if you're distracted this way and that way, so is the attention in the moment that leads to the other gifts of the mind, and focus as well. All of them come through this keyhole or porthole of attention.
Very interesting indeed. Thank you. And what I see is, it also allows us to decide where we are paying attention in the moment and what comes up through that, which is building this base of awareness. Thank you so much for sharing that, Chris.
Thank you, Chris, for that insight. Very, very interesting definition of how you use the hand and the arm analogy. Moving deeper into the topic of our discussions today, I'd like to ask you on the specific skills. Yeah, what specific skills can leaders cultivate or strengthen with mindfulness training? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the skills that leaders can develop are many and various. The World Economic Forum, every 2 years, it gives a list. It consults with leaders around the world. So, what are the top 10 skills that you need? And these vary every 2 years, but invariably, it's skills that are hard skills like computers skills and what have you. And there are the softer skills, emotional intelligence, cognitive flexibility. Mark Williams calls this the workbench of the mind, the ability to hold an idea in your mind and to look at it from different ways. I think many of the interactional skills about how we treat each other, the emotional intelligence, how we operate in groups, how we respect each other. Perhaps not a hierarchy like that, but a hierarchy like this, that you have respect, and you have that in the East, in Japan, the quality circles, listening to people on the shop floor, not the boss sending everything down, but the workers sending messages up. Many leadership skills, I think, can be developed. The focus and attention skills, the emotional skills, and the self-care skills. Many leaders think, and Mrs. Thatcher used to say, I only have 4 hours a night sleep. Great. But there's a consequence to that. It can affect you in older age if you do not have the ability to regulate your emotions, to listen to your body, that biofeedback, which is going on all the time through the vagus nerve from the brain into all the organs, not just sending the messages down, but the organs sending the messages back to keep yourself in balance. And in Parliament, the course that we followed, it was Peace in a Frantic World. I thought I had my book with me. And it was about using the breath as an anchor and the body as an anchor. It was an 8-week course, modified for Parliament. It should be 2.5 hours a week. It was 1.25. And there were 8 weeks worth of lessons, and at each lesson we would look at different skills to practice. These skills have benefits for ourselves, but also in our leadership roles. We'd keep a gratitude diary. And if I had to say, probably the biggest thing that's changed my life over the past 10, 12 years is it's keeping that diary, as well as my sitting practice. We learn how to nourish, the difference between nourishment and depletion. That there are things that nourish us, feed us, and there are things that deplete us. And that if we have them in balance, it's good. But quite often, when times of crisis, when things are getting whirling round, we throw out the things that nourish us and take on the things that deplete us, until in the end, we burn out. Now, that's not good for any leader, to burn out. We learnt about habits. I think it was Aristotle that said we are what we repeatedly do. We learned how we looked at our individual habits, the bad ones and the good ones, and how to break these and develop these. And again, leaders need to know that, if they have 360-degree feedback in companies, you do this right, you do this wrong, to be able to examine that, say that is actually a bad habit, I'm going to try and break that. That is a good habit, I'm going to try and build on that. So a great one is the difference between a reaction and a response. An immediate reaction and a more considered response. That is a key leadership skill. There are people who are going to upset you in your professional life, in your personal life. And if you can put a gap of half a second or a second between the stimulus and the response, you will be a better person. You will run a better organization. I think it was Viktor Frankl that said, Holocaust survivor and philosopher, between stimulus and response, there is a gap. And in that gap, we make our choice. And in that choice, we have our freedom. So, and we know it intuitively. We say, I'm not sure if these idioms will transfer across, but hold your tongue, bite your lip, count to 10, take a deep breath. We know that if we can pause, we are better. And if you have a look at the number of marriages that have failed because people didn't have that distance, the number of people that are in prison because they didn't have that distance between stimulus and response, the number of bad decisions that have been made by political leaders and economic leaders because they didn't know the difference between a reaction and a response. I'm going on a bit there, but there are definite leadership skills in focus, attention, interactive, emotional skills that can be developed and are developed through the practice of mindfulness.
Interesting you mentioned about the 360 appraisal system that many companies have in place. But you mentioned quite a lot of advantages and good points on mindfulness for leaders. But do you actually see many leaders actually practicing them?
Well, anybody looking at British politics over the past 5 years, and it wasn't, I think you said 150 members of parliament. It's 330 over the past 10 years. We've just come up to the 10th anniversary. So 330 parliamentarians out of about 1,400 in the House of Commons and the House of Lords have had mindfulness training, and 800 members of staff. But most people looking at that, the behaviour of British politicians over the past 5 or 6 years since Brexit would see no evidence of that. But I say if we hadn't have had that, it would have been worse. And there are examples of politicians saying, British politicians and politicians from other countries, about the benefits that mindfulness has brought to them personally and politically. It's a lovely man called Tim Lawton. I'm a Labour politician on the left. Tim is a Conservative on the right. He is co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on mindfulness. And Tim said, since he's been practicing over 10 years, one of the biggest benefits is that it has helped him to, when you're having discussion, to disagree better, not to personalise it, not to hate the person and their idea, maybe to disagree with the idea, but respect the person. So to disagree better. Tracy Crouch, who is, again, a former co-chair, a lovely woman, a Conservative on the right, she has gained it from mindfulness. She was able to give up her antidepressants. I'm not breaking confidences here. She went on BBC Radio 4 to talk about this. She was on antidepressants. She used mindfulness and it helped her to give up those. She used it during childbirth to lower the pain. And she's recently had cancer and she's used mindfulness to help her to recover. So kind of on the medical side. But she also said in the chamber, when she was a backbencher, she would practice the mountain technique. She would be about to speak and she would put her feet on the floor and she would imagine herself as a mountain, and then she would stand up and be able to feel fully connected and project her voice, project her ideas, her ideals, her values, an argument. So that's what she gained from mindfulness. This helped her at the dispatch box when she was a minister. She had to face 350 hostile opposition MPs, a lonely minister at the dispatch box. And this mountain helped her in that way. Lord Alan Howarth, a Labour Lord, said it creates our weekly practice on a Tuesday night for an hour creates an oasis of calm. So it's kind of an institutional thing, not just people coming together. MPs from other parliaments, Esther Oghad, who is a Dutch female MP, she said, when you come into politics, you're shoved by your political party, you're shoved by your constituencies, you're shoved by the media, and you can be separated from your values. She said mindfulness has helped her to anchor her values. And another lovely woman from Estonia, Yoko Alander, she said, if we can't lead ourselves, how can we lead others? So that leadership. So those are from a personal perspective, what I've gained from it, but also from what I've picked up from other politicians in the United Kingdom and around the world. It has helped them.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that insight.
That leads me to, that got me very curious around leaders and mindfulness. I'm going to dwell on this a little more, because I often get this from leaders. Leaders tell me, when I practice mindfulness, I slow down and I become I become still, right? The stillness of mindfulness slows me down. So could that make me lose my drive in trying to create results? Maybe profitability, which is assumed that I need to be driven, I need to drive people, or even sometimes even up the wall, right? So to achieve those outcomes, business outcomes. So this is a question that I often receive, and of course we all respond to this question in our own ways. But what has been your experience, especially that you have worked on a report around mindfulness in the workplace? Right. So, yeah, what insights have you gathered? Or I'm also very curious if you've ever encountered such a response from leaders as well.
Yeah. I have, from a politician from Liverpool, nearby Liverpool, lovely fella. I won't say his name, but I said, do you want to come on the course? Dave, that's his first name. He says, Chris, I don't want to lose my drive. I want my passion. I said, you still have passion. It is something that has to be addressed on a personal level, your degree of passion. And the other thing is anger. Anger brought me into politics 40 years ago in the 1980s. Anger against a conservative government that I saw was wrecking working class communities. So anger brought me into politics, but anger can only sustain you for so long. If anger becomes your master instead of your servant, it can take you down dangerous paths. And we've seen that with political leaders around the world, the ones that have been led by anger, by blaming, by othering. And we've seen it with other political leaders. And I won't name the ones powered by anger, because that just will bring more anger back. But the ones that have tamed their anger, righteous anger, like Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Jacinda Ardern, who just retired. So it's mindfulness can help you become the master of your anger, the master of your passions. I mean, I used to be, I was once described by a conservative right-wing comedy sketch writer for the Daily Mail in 2011. When I was PPS, I was like the eyes and ears, the shadow chancellor that controlled, if he was elected, would become probably the second most important man in the country, run the economy. So I used to sit behind him on the green benches in Parliament, and if I saw anybody having a go at him, I'd throw out a jibe, I'd throw out a laugh, and I'd feel good. People would laugh, I'd be the centre of attention. But sometimes they were cruel. And this right-wing conservative sketch writer described me as a knuckle-dragging torturer's assistant. And I thought it was pretty cruel. I have a gentle side too, but that's how he described me. Now, 8 years later, 2019, I asked the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom a question about mindfulness. And she responded. She said it was used for this. Her assistant had actually been on the course in Parliament. Assistant had been on the course in Parliament. A constituency had come to her and said, I think it's great. And then she sat down. And then the Speaker of the House of Commons The then Speaker, John Bercow, stood up and he said, "The honourable member is indeed a mindful fellow. It wasn't always the case." So he'd witnessed a journey that I'd been on from a knuckle-dragging torturer's assistant into a mindful fellow over an 8 or 9 year period. I still have that kind of, but I am hopefully the master of that, and not the servant of my anger and my passions.
I particularly like the part that you said. I mean, I liked all the part, but this part really stood out for me because about anger, responding from anger as opposed to reacting from anger, right? Which has a very huge, I think it leads to two different types of outcomes: reacting from anger as opposed to responding from anger, righteous anger, as you have mentioned. Now, that also, it allowed me to see the whole value of mindfulness, which allows us to regulate our emotions, not by attenuating it or trying to resist it, but rather respond from it. I think that's a very interesting thing that came up for me as you were sharing this. And that leads me to another question. Now, we also know, Mark Williams has talked about this as well, about the activating the compassion centers of the brain when we practice mindfulness. So then, could compassion help leaders? Or have you seen that help leaders? Or have you seen leaders moving from maybe less compassion to having more of it in the way that when they relate with their teammates and direct reports or colleagues?
Yeah, I think you can have compassion burnout, and they affect certain professions more than other professions, and quite often it's the professions where there is human contact. You know, you can only take so much sorrow, and then the heart hardens, or tends to harden. You see it in the nursing and the medical profession. You see it in the army, in the trenches, in the First World War, static, where they would use dark humour to lighten their load, and you see it in politics as well. You know, people come to politicians with their problems. You see it in the legal profession. So there are certain professions where this where compassion is denuded, is reduced. And the wonderful thing about this is it's been heavily researched, and one of the best researchers in the world is a lovely woman called Tanya Singer in the Max Planck Institute in Germany. And in essence, she's looked at the impact of loving kindness, of metta, of compassion for yourself, for your loved ones, people you know, people you pass on the street, people you do not like, and for the planet itself, and building out. And she has scientifically proven, that these qualities of compassion can be built upon. And that's what the world needs today, because we have big problems coming out there. Big problems, artificial intelligence. How will that impact on the jobs and our ability to provide food for our family? And robotics. Climate change, not just the impact on that person, but when that person has got to leave their homeland and move to somewhere else where do not want them there. How do we deal with the migrants from climate change? Political polarization, the deliberate whipping up of hatred from the polarized extremes, and the majority in the middle being caught in torment with issues. So we've got all of these. Terrorism is another thing. The way we organize our economy around getting material things. We spend money we haven't got on goods we don't need to impress people we don't like, on that treadmill, saying to ourselves, I'm on this treadmill to provide for my wife and my child. But what the wife, or the spouse and the child wants is the person. But our economy is geared to making us go round on that treadmill. So you've got all of these things that are reducing compassion, and we need to expand that compassion, and it's scientifically proven. And we should be trying on a lifelong journey to recognize that compassion is what makes us human. It's what divided us from the animals. It's not what Darwin said, the survival of the fittest. It is the survival of the fittest and the most social. One person couldn't bring down an elephant or a tiger. It was the group connecting. And for connection to continue, prosper, you need compassion. You need compassion and you need trust. So compassion, I think, is absolutely key. And there's a separate all-party parliamentary group in Parliament on compassion, as well as the compassion element of mindfulness. We have a separate, and it's an international group now, run by Jennifer Nadel. She has great values. Compassion is key.
That was so beautiful. Thank you, Chris, for that. Now, this leads me to the social dimension of mindfulness, dealing when it comes to probably around how leaders create policies for people. All right. But that is also connected to the role of politicians. Now, sometimes when I use the word politician, I get a different image. When I think of the word public leader, I get a different image, right? It's very different. A politician is quite different from a public leader in at least in my vision. So my question is not necessarily how could politicians benefit from mindfulness or this compassion or this human-centeredness that you just mentioned, or the person-centeredness, but rather how could public leaders benefit from compassion, from this person-centeredness, this human-centeredness when they formulate policies? Have you seen that happen, like in your sphere of work, or have you encountered anyone who had shared that policies and leaders or public leaders who practice mindfulness?
Yeah. When I first had the idea of starting an all-party parliamentary group back in 2012, we established it in 2013, I wanted to go right ahead with policy. I've been practicing for 6 years. I knew the benefits for me. I wanted to go straight ahead with policy. And John Kabat-Zinn was over from Boston, addressing a conference in Wales. And I told him about my idea about taking mindfulness forward in health and education, criminal justice, the workplace. He said, slow down, Chris. This is a 1,000-year project. I thought, oh no, I was 54 at the time. I'll be 1,054 by the time this finishes. But John made a serious point in that I'd been touched by mindfulness and it was a gift that was given to me. I wanted to give it away to others. I was in a political position to be able to do that. And I wanted to get on with it. He said, slow down, let the others go on their mindfulness journey, let them practice it. And if they want to take mindfulness forward into policy, then so be it. If they don't, then maybe another time. Very wise approach that John took and we listened to. So I think we had about 2 or 3 cohorts in the first year, 2013. And the following year, we set up and I think there were about 85 had gone through that course, and about 20 wanted to work on policy. So that's when we had our parliamentary inquiry and developed the Mindful Nation inquiry and produced this report. And it's mindfulness in health, education, criminal justice, and the workplace. And at the back, I think there's 240. It's better online because you get the hyperlinks into all of the 218 different references, many of them scientific references. It was a great inquiry. This is being translated into Spanish, Portuguese, and Croatian. So it's available to about 1/3 of the planet in their own language. And it's inspired other nations to do similar. In the French Parliament, they've had their mindfulness initiative have also produced reports into other aspects of policy in French life. So a great report. And but some of the problems I mentioned before about political polarization, about climate change, about artificial intelligence, I think this was Mindful Nation UK, I think now is the time for a Mindful Planet report. The research for this was done in 2014. There's been 25,000 scientific papers written on mindfulness. Last year, research into mindfulness overtook CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. So there's lots of problems that could end the planet. There's lots of research that has been done. Can we get the two to match on a global scale, tapping into the great centers of academic excellence, Harvard, Yale, Oxford, Cambridge, Melbourne, universities around the world. So tapping into those universities, but also tapping in to the innate and natural wisdom that is out there in indigenous communities. When I go to South America or talk to people in Africa and say, this is Western science and Eastern Buddhist philosophy coming together, they say, hold on, what about the South? What about Ubuntu, I am me through we? What about the traditions in Latin America, in Peru, Ecuador, that inspired an Ecuadorian health minister to develop public policy around these traditions? What about the connection of the indigenous people in Australia to the land? They could teach us masses. So is it time for a mindful planet inquiry into how mindfulness in various forms and indigenous wisdom can help us meet these challenges head on?
Well, that's certainly something that we look forward to, Chris. I'm sure we would very much love to be part of that studies as well. Yeah, like to touch on your personal journey now as an MP or as ex-MP now. So in your life, what do you think mindfulness has created in terms of positive change for you as a member of parliament?
What change has it brought about in me? It's made me less aggressive, more thoughtful, more compassionate. It's helped me with my attention and focus, especially in the morning. It's made me more grateful, is my gratitude diary. And I think it was Cicero that said that gratitude is the mother of all other virtues. If you're grateful, you can develop other virtues. It's made me more appreciative of nature. I feel more connected to nature. Sometimes I'll get up in the morning and 6 o'clock at daybreak, and I'll sit in the garden and I'll listen to bird song. I'll watch the light coming in, the sideways light hitting the bushes and the trees. I'll go on an early morning bike ride, sometimes at 5 o'clock in the morning, along the river or on the seafront, and notice and smell and touch and taste things. It's just, for me, if I have to sum it up with one word, it's made me more connected with myself, more connected with my loved ones, family and friends, more connected with society. The connection, I think, would be the all-encompassing word, I would say, or the all-encompassing gift that mindfulness has given me.
Interesting. Now, this also leads me, so when you talk about connection, more compassion, less aggression, and all of that. Now, sometimes I do see leaders compete, right? Even politicians compete, right, for votes as well. So how can we be mindful as we compete for results, right? I mean, I've seen the best of behaviors, best of the self in competition. And of course, all of us would have seen the worst as well. I mean, it doesn't have to be your experience, but what do you think, even hypothetically, right? What could be possible when politicians compete, or when leaders compete for support? Sometimes it's not even from my own interpretation. Sometimes I see it is not how good a policy or an idea is, but it's all about how much support I get, right, for an idea, right, more than anything else. The louder person wins sometimes, not all the time though, although sometimes we don't want that, right? But what has been your experience in that area? How could we compete mindfully? Because it's in some people say that it's inevitable that we have to compete. Some others say that no, we don't have to compete. There is so much in the world, in society, in our environment, that's enough for everyone. We don't have to compete. What would be your take on this?
I have used competition very, very unmindfully when I'm as chair the Mindfulness Initiative's global network. So there are 50 countries around the world that are trying to introduce mindfulness into their legislature. And I'm chair of this committee. We meet twice a year. We usually have about 26 people over 2 days from 26 countries. And I say, oh, do you know that in France they're doing this to a politician? And I'll say, we'll do that and we'll do it better. So I've promoted mindfulness in a very unmindful way to politicians in other countries. So that is a good thing. You know, competition can be a good thing, but it's the intention of that competition. It is the intention to say we're better than you. You know, pull your tongue out and strut your stuff. What is the thing? We're better than you. We're going this way, but we're doing it for our people. And some of the ideas we will share with you. Maybe you want to share some back with us. We'll swap our technologies. In Europe, you know, they've had we're only 30 miles away from here. We've got the most expansive factory in the whole of Western Europe, and they make the Airbus wings. So these are big, huge factories for big, huge wings. And it's a cooperation between Spain, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. They're better together. Now, I was a politician, a Labour politician, that did not like Brexit. The United Kingdom being part of the European community, the European Union for 35 years. I think we are better together. A degree of cooperation is necessary. We were part of a group of 500, half a billion people, the richest area the world had ever known, with liberal values of respect for all religions, all people, all genders, and we pulled away from it. So I think competition is good if the intention is right, but I think we are, I mentioned before, when we were on the savannah hunting the elephant or whatever, one person couldn't bring them down. 10 men went out there and said, right, I'm going to kill him, I'm going to kill him. You know, they'd probably all be killed separately. 10 people go out together to hunt the elephant, then they can all live for a month or so on the fruit of their combined endeavour. And I think that is key. And I feel more cooperative now than I've ever been.
That's very nice. I really like the way that you have repositioned, you know, or rather, you know, what you said, like you've taken a different perspective around competition and how it can be mindful and can be very beneficial actually to humanity. Now, that leads me also to the next question, which is around how we have used mindfulness for the longest time, which has been to reduce stress and also to prevent the relapse of depression episodes or reduce the number of depressive episodes for people. Now, beyond stress reduction and reducing depression relapse, how else do you think mindfulness can impact and the enhancement of well-being or making people happier? Love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Before, if I can just dwell on the medical side first, because over the past 10 months, there have been two big developments on that from a UK perspective. I mentioned before the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, which oversees all new medicines and all new interventions into the British National Health Service. And I think in March of that year, of last year, they looked at the science of mindfulness for less severe depression. Okay, the science for severe depression was accepted nearly 20 years ago, less severe depression, and it was one of 7 interventions that they approved of, the National Institute of Clinical Excellence approved of, before GPs, MDs, doctors prescribe antidepressants. They realized that the number of antidepressants had shot up like this in the United Kingdom. They wanted GPs to cut back on that, and they said these are 7 interventions, and one of those 7 was mindfulness for less severe depression. So that was big. They also looked in May of last year at the evidence for workplace well-being, and they said that everything they looked at, the best science for workplace well-being initiatives was mindfulness, meditation, and yoga. So a highly respected scientific organization has approved those for medical conditions, and for well-being, for less severe depression. But mindfulness, is not just confined to people who are suffering. Mindfulness, I think, can be applied to not just the 25 or 35% of the population, to bring them from below the well-being curve back up to it, but actually above and beyond. I think mindfulness has the potential to shift that whole well-being curve along. And in doing that, the biggest beneficiary will be the tail enders here. As we push the whole curve along, they will benefit more than anybody. But the 100% of the population can benefit. And it's not just about bringing people back up to normal where they were or where they should be, but to human flourishing. And there are people like Felicia Huppert and there was Rose that have looked at this well-being curve and have developed policies for that. And I think mindfulness is central to that. So it's not just about those suffering, and the science is there for them. It is also about human flourishing and happiness. I think happiness is a little bit of a woolly word. People think about this as happiness, but it's about human flourishing. It's about using our frontal lobes to achieve, be the best person that we can. It's the same mindfulness. It's hard to do that if you're below the curve. So getting up to where you should be is the first step, but it can go above and beyond. And I think I mentioned NICE, and that's 3 slices of the salami they looked at. 20 years ago for repeat episode depression. Last March for less severe depression. Last May, it was for mindfulness in the workplace. Now, a salami sausage is a long Polish or German sausage which is sliced. I'm not sure if you'll have them in your countries around the world, but that's fine. And NICE has to do that because it has to say, this intervention just here will work, just here. But I think it's not just about those 3 slices of the salami sausage. I think the whole sausage is good. The whole of mindfulness is good. And I say that because, as I said before, it affects different people in different ways. But in our report here, in each of the domains, health, education, criminal justice, and the workplace, we asked for policies to be taken forward on irritable bowel syndrome, cancer recovery rates, on heart disease, because we couldn't nail the research down exactly at that point 10 years ago. But we knew intuitively that it helped us to for all of our physical, mental conditions. In the East, the mind and the body have always been connected. In the West, because of Descartes and others, the mind and the body have been separated. And it is only in the recent decades that Western philosophy and most importantly, Western science have said, we got it wrong. For 400 years, we got it wrong. In the East, they got it right. We are connected, mind and body. And I don't know how we came to that position because, again, we know it intuitively. We say, my heart was in my mouth. I had butterflies in my stomach. A thought that happens here has an impact here or in other different places. And I'm hoping that Western medicine learns from the East and treats people as a whole.
Mm. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing that. And it makes complete sense on how mindfulness is linking to happiness and to the connection, which does not exist just here or, just when we are dealing with a higher level thing as a politician or a leader. But just building up on that, being a leader, one of the things that, prevents us from probably being happy with probably the work that we are doing is sometimes taking decisions that could be momentous in a lot of sense, right? So one of the things that most leaders would deal with is, ethical dilemmas. So in Indian context, we sometimes call it dharma sankat. And there has been like this whole Mahabharat, which has dharma sankat as a recurring theme coming up and again. So I would like to know more from you whether you think that mindfulness is something which is helpful for leaders to resolve ethical dilemmas, and if that is also able to connect them to become more happier in a sense that they are taking decisions. So how do you think these are connected?
I think it can, because to make a proper decision, you have to be centered. I mentioned Blaise Pascal before about being silent in a room, centered. And because if we're in the past, our former glories, we were the best nation the world has ever seen. And you heard it recently in the US and the UK. Let's make America great again. Let's make Britain great again. They're in the past. They're not in the present. So I think for leaders to make ethical decisions, they need to be in the present moment. And it's not just me. They need to practice nourishment. They need to be balanced and not imbalanced. It's not just me saying this and other politicians. I can just show you this up here. This is a report that's been published by the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. So some of your countries out there will be members of the CPA. There's 58 countries around the world that are members of the CPA. The CPA wrote to all of those legislatures, those parliaments around the world, and said, what interventions are you doing for your political leaders, for your politicians? And only 18 out of 58 replied, but of those 18, 2 of them were mindfulness in the United Kingdom and in the Canadian Parliament. So the CPA recognised for good governance, for good ethical decisions, political leaders need to be balanced. And it's difficult in some countries. In my country, 15 years ago, mentioning mental illness to politicians, you couldn't do it. And a very brave, conservative British politician called Dan Poulter, who also happened to be a psychiatrist, cooperated with the chief psychiatrist for the United Kingdom, Sir Simon Wellesby, and they produced a report from questionnaires given back by members of Parliament, and it showed that 75% of British MPs had mental illness. Another report out a month ago showed that 50% of their staff had mental illness. These are big, big issues. And if you're suffering with mental illness, can you make the right ethical decision? Can you make the right decision per se? You may make it, you might have some insight, but it's probably more likely to occur if you are from a position of balance. So this is a great book. I highly recommend this. And if anybody out there has has connections with their political leaders, they can send them a link to this. It's available online. Again, all of the hyperlinks in the back will ping you straight into the research and to the programs that were developed in these 18 countries. I take this everywhere I go now. It legitimizes mindfulness. It makes it mainstream. This isn't fuzzy. You know, this is not just the CPA, but the World Economic Forum. Captains of the universe are recommending mindfulness. The United Nations and the World Health Organization are using it in refugee camps around the world. No, it's a gift. And it's not woolly, it's scientific, proven.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And I think Albert has also kindly put in the links for both the books that you have been talking about. So very happy that these are available online. So again, these are links that could be further shared to whoever is interested to know more about these. So thank you for touching on these points, Chris. And again, one very interesting thing that I noticed, and I would also like it to expand the use of mindfulness in that sense, would be to move away from, leadership in a sense of leading people and also linking it with personal leadership. So the terms that you used that allows us to make the best decisions is, balance. I heard balance coming out. I heard wisdom coming out, gratitude and compassion. And my personal experience tells me that, these are things, these are values that also become very important for me personally when I'm on this journey of personal leadership. My work, makes me a leader, not just personally, but also talking to a lot of people, talking about mindfulness. And this is what brings the best. I have noticed this in my life also. So thank you for bringing that. So I'm also trying to link, it's not just important for leading others, but also for self. This is something that you touched upon earlier, right? When you mentioned how can you lead others if you can't.
Yeah, Yoko Allender, a lovely, lovely politician, and a pithy quote: "If we can't lead ourselves, how can we lead others?"
Yes, exactly. And this also sort of links me to the next question. So I'll do this, and then I see there are some questions from the audiences in the chat also. So we'll pick those up also to discuss them further. For now, I'll also link this to the future. So in mindfulness, we talk about the present moment awareness, how we are being here and then, balancing ourselves and then take the next step. So I also want to hear from you how mindfulness paves a way probably for a better future. And when I'm talking about a better future, who am I talking about? Whose better future? So maybe you could also link this with the future in a way that, you have experienced it.
Yeah, I mean, the criticism from some people on the left is that mindfulness is about resilience, the resilience of the individual. It's like a shield. So the companies can, if the individual, or if the company helps the individual develop the shield, they can put more pressure on that individual. And that, for me, is not right. I don't think it's, I wouldn't say it's a tool of the capitalist system. I don't think John Kabat-Zinn, Mark Williams, or any of the philosophers or scientists would ever think of themselves as tools of the capitalist system. I think, but having said that, there are pressures that are coming down on individuals. And it's fine for people like me, a politician on the left, to sit with politicians on the right in a nice warm room next to the River Thames in the House of Commons, in an oak panelled room, and meditate and then go away. But we have done more than that. We've developed policies. But we need to be looking above and beyond. What are the stresses of society, of our economy? The World Health Organization said, and they said this in 2011, by 2030, the biggest health burden on the whole of the planet will be depression. Not mental illness, just depression. Bigger than heart health, bigger than cancer. So what is it that's brought this about? Not just from 2011 till 2030, but longer than that. And there are pressures on individuals, the way that we advertise, the purpose. There's a great British journalist called Oliver James. He wrote the book Affluenza, and he tracked the increase in advertising to the increase in mental ill health. The purpose of an advert is to make you unhappy with what you've got, so that you'll purchase something new. You'll throw away what you've got, and you'll purpose. And that's old-fashioned advertising on the TV. And now we have micro advertising from Facebook and Twitter. Every time you click your mouse, they know the neural pathways in your brain. They know what you want. They know your own mind better than you do. And they know it for billions of people. And they can say, this produce will go down well there, and we'll sell it. So there's advertising. There's the social media capture of all that individual personalized information. There's the way we organize our economy 24/7. We upset our circadian rhythms. You know, people who work through the night for years and decades, they die earlier. They're less happy. There is big food, hyper processed food, and the impact that has on our gut, on our biome. It's very profitable to package it all, throw this in, throw that in, and all of these different chemicals. It's destroying our gut. You know, there's big pharma. They spend, these figures are from 20 years ago, £20 billion a year on government relations, on public relations, and on advertising. So you've got all of these pressures that are hitting families, children especially. Now, I think some of that needs to be assessed, reassessed, and legislation passed to make sure the worst aspects of that are not poisoning our people, poisoning our children. So look into the future. If we have mindful politicians who are well balanced, compassionate, intelligent, focused, then they're more likely to look at the evidence and say, perhaps David Cameron, Conservative Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, was right, that we should be doing something against the fashion industry when they're selling size 0 to 13-year-old girls who are then getting anorexia and bulimia, and that's shooting up, and they're doing the self-harm as well. Perhaps politicians, conservative politicians like George Osborne, realise that the sugar industry has pumped too much sugar into our children and our people, and implemented a 5% sugar tax. So these are politicians on the right. These are capitalist politicians who have a degree of heart and realise that damage is being done to individuals, to societies, and in the long term, to our economies. So look into the future. I think it's not a panacea. Mindfulness is not a panacea. It doesn't calm everything. But it's a journey on an individual. For me, I'm still on it. 15 years now. And until the day I die. But if we can teach mindfulness in our schools, if we can prepare today's leaders, and tomorrow's leaders especially, to reconnect with those gifts I think that we had in the past, that connection with nature. In the West, we have people have turned away from religion. They've turned away from Catholicism, Protestantism, and they have they're missing something. They're missing that connection, because many of these gifts, the gift of silence is in all major traditions in the world. The gift of gratitude and praise is in all wisdom traditions in the world. You know, the gift of compassion is in all wisdom traditions in the world. Some of those wisdom traditions have been thrown out, and with them, some of those key gifts. And they can be reintroduced in a secular, scientific way. And if people want to go on to the religious and to the spiritual, they can. They don't need to. But these are gifts of the mind that I think could and should be developed in a structured way around the globe, through governments, through departments in countries around the world.
That's very, very beautifully summed up, Chris. And we do want to give the opportunity to our audiences who has some questions for you. And the first questions actually come from William. So William, if you can unmute your microphone and please direct your questions to Chris.
Hi, William.
Hi, Chris. I'm sorry because my camera is not functioning well. That's why I off that. So my first question to you is: does humanity in itself have mindfulness, or is a learned behavior? That's the first question. Second question is: what will be the first few steps to do if you want to practice mindfulness? I got to off my my apologies, Chris. I have to off my camera because it's not functioning well. Thank you, Chris, and everyone.
Oh, thanks, William. I've attended many conferences with John Kabat-Zinn, and so this isn't my quote; it's his quote. He said, "Humans, the Greek name for them is Homo sapien sapien, not Homo sapien, Homo sapien sapien. The man, and I'm sorry, there are some women here, the person who is aware that he is aware." So that's what makes us human. It's that second layer of awareness. The animals have the awareness, but humans have the awareness of the awareness. And so I think it is innate. I think that awareness can be denuded, it can be reduced, or it can be that second awareness, that metacognition, that meta-awareness can be denuded, it can be expanded. And mindfulness for me is a key tool in that. So that's the first part of your question. The second part: what are the first steps? And I suppose the second is not my quote. I think it's a Chinese proverb. You know, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. So the first step, your intention, is I want to try mindfulness, and there are many ways to do that. From a kind of executive function approach, from a spiritual approach, from a health approach. So I think the first step is to take that first step, is to download an app. And there are many. There are Calm, there's Andy Puddicombe's Headspace. There are books, Mark Williams's Peace in a Frantic World. There are podcasts. There are two mindfulness sites that I use, and both are free. One is Insight Timer, and they have 150,000 different meditations and talks, which you can search for. So there's Insight Timer, and there is also Dharma Seed, which is more Buddhist and more spiritual. But there's masses out there. Probably the advice I would give is pick somebody that you trust, that you know, personally know, that practices mindfulness and you respect, and ask them what they would what they would recommend in your country or your town or city. And the best, though, I think, is to attend an actual physical course face to face in your own town, city, or village. That's the way. I was practicing for 6 years with podcasts, and I got a great deal out of it. It wasn't until I sat face to face in a group with 22 other politicians, Mark Williams and Chris Cullen from Oxford, that it really did touch on. So dabble, stick your toe in the water with the podcasts, find a local group where you can practice. And if you can't practice physically, then practice face to virtual face over Zoom.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Chris, for addressing that. And I hope it answers the question for William here. And just to manage time better, I will pose the next question to you. So this question has been asked by Lena Lim. So she asks, in your experience in the political world or through personal encounters, what was or is the biggest hurdle in getting people to want to learn mindfulness? So as a teacher, this is something that a lot of mindfulness teachers might be struggling with. So what do you think is the biggest hurdle to get people to learn mindfulness?
I think they change over time. The biggest hurdle 10 years ago was not to put it in the medical, clinical area. So, because politicians would think, if I go to that, people will think I'm mad. So, but the zeitgeist around that, in the United Kingdom at least, differs, even from one to France or Germany, even within the same continent, similar countries, the zeitgeist and the attitude towards mental illness will change. So that's one barrier, and that's why we led with the science. Another barrier in South America was religious. I know a lovely woman who was trying to introduce mindfulness into a South American parliament. And when she used the word mindfulness, they said, this is Buddhism through the back door. We don't want it. She has now changed the word mindfulness to attention training. So that can be another barrier. That kind of, and it's difficult because many people who come to mindfulness from a spiritual connection, from being a child, they say, this is my religion. It's just part of me. And you're bastardizing it, you're utilizing it, you're taking away the essence. And I appreciate that. But from a Western perspective, or from a non-Buddhist perspective, or from a non-spiritual perspective, if you want to take this gift to a British minister, I cannot say this is a Buddhist practice. Can we invest some public money into it? I have to say this has been looked at by the National Institute of Clinical Excellence. It's been scientifically proven. It will help bring depression rates down. We have it. So I think it's taking people where they're at, and it's the intention. So yeah, the spiritual nature of it and the clinical nature of it is another. Jamie Bristow, in our book Mindfulness in the Workplace, listed about 9 criticisms of mindfulness, and the riposte, the answer to those criticisms. Some people say that mindfulness, I'm not doing mindfulness, it's dangerous. I read an article that it's dangerous, it can send you off. I mean, and when you look at this, it's when people have been on 3 or 4 month retreats, they've gone down perhaps too deep, too fast, without the experience in it. Sometimes people who've suffered trauma, if you do a body scan, it can have an adverse effect. But if mindfulness is taught by trained professionals, if there's proper screening from the outset, if there is sensitivity during the course of the course, if it's invitational, you might want to do this, you might not want to do it, not forcing people to do it. If it's done in a sensitive, compassionate way, then the damage from mindfulness will be minimal, especially when compared to antidepressants. I don't want to knock out antidepressants too much, but over-reliance on them just to improve the profit margins of drug companies is not right, because they've been over-promoted. If they help stabilize and help you move on, all well and good. So, yeah, so just my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Chris. Now, so with that, let's now, I'm going to ask the final question in view of time. This question comes from Subramanian. Now, this is very related to something that you had shared earlier. Subramanian, would you like to ask directly? Yeah, since you've raised your hand.
Yeah.
Hi, Subramanian.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris, for the wonderful session, enlightening session. I'm a mental health professional, and I work with a lot of crisis interventions for youngsters, especially college boys and girls. And then they find that most of them go into a very traumatic experience. As far as India is concerned, I don't have statistics on other countries due to peer pressure or due to the parental pressure. And I know mindfulness can have a lot of remedy for most of this. What tips you would like to give to them so that they can have a balanced life? Because youngsters are more relevant in today's context. I hope I'm clear.
Yeah, no, you are. Yeah, and from a clinical perspective, if they're undergoing depression or mental health issues, there are 3 ways to treat it. The first is through talking therapies on a one-to-one basis, and even in the so-called rich West, the queues to see a talking therapist, a psychiatrist, they're probably like this, you know. A counsellor, they're like that, but they're huge. So that is one way. The second way is through antidepressants. And in the United Kingdom, I put this down as a written parliamentary question in 2017. The number of antidepressants issued in England in 1991 was 7 million. And the number of prescriptions written in 2017 was something like 70 million. So they've gone up like that. So we can rely on antidepressants, but they're to limited effect. And the third way is through mindfulness. And this list of positives get longer because people say to me, you've forgotten this. But mindfulness has been scientifically proven since 2004. It has been used in the health services, I think, of Japan, US, Sweden, Canada, UK since then. So it's been in practice. It is cost efficient. It is non-stigmatizing. If you say you're on antidepressants, people will say, ooh. If you say you're going to see the psychiatrist, people will say, what's wrong with him? If you say you're going to mindfulness, they'll say, can I come along too? It's non-stigmatizing, which is very, very important, especially to young people. It's scalable. It can be taught in a mountainous region, in a lowly populated region, through Zoom, as we've proved over COVID. It has the ability to bring a person back from being depressed or from having suboptimal mental health to above and beyond to human flourishing. Antidepressants don't do that. It is, I think I'm up to about 7. I think I've missed a couple off there. So there's 3 ways to deal with it. And these 2 are over-relied on. One-to-one counselling, I think, is brilliant. But the weights for that, antidepressants, I think, have been overused. This is a massive, and it's only in the past 20 years that the science has been proven. You know, it's a gift. And can I just say, the United Nations, Mark Williams sent me an email 2 weeks back, and it was from a South African psychiatrist who'd attended his lecture on mindfulness 13 years before. It was new to her. She went away, she bought his book, she practiced, she looked up YouTube, she's looked up the research, and she's developed a policy now working with the United Nations that's been used with 210 million refugees around the world. I mean, I think that's something like 2% of the human population where mindfulness is. Mark wasn't aware of this 3 weeks ago. I wasn't aware of it. So these things are bubbling up around the world. So I think, it can be taught in poorer countries. It can be taught over big geographical areas. It can be taught internationally. And I think the world and policymakers like the CPA, like the World Health Organization, like the United Nations, the European Union, are waking up to the science behind mindfulness, willing to put it in its rightful place in dealing with many of the problems that are facing humanity.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
It's wonderful.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you everyone in the room for attending this session. And it's amazing how time has just flew past us, especially when we talk, when we engage in a conversation like this, which straddles not just about mental health, but also about how we live our lives. And that was something that I'm taking away from what Chris had shared. And these nuggets of wisdom from Chris, I hope would generate many insights for all of us who are attending in this session right now, and also those of you who are possibly watching this video. And I would like to thank Chris one more time for taking time off his, time is very precious these days. And yet when we spend time and when someone contributes his or her time for the well-being of the world, as what we have witnessed from Chris today, and I think it's really it's really something to be very grateful for. Thank you so much, Chris, for being here and enlightening us.
And can I just say, if anybody, I mentioned the Mindfulness Initiative Global Network, 50 countries around the world. There are not many that are in Asia or Southeast Asia, and this is the home of mindfulness. If anybody has any connections with politicians in their country and that would like me to do a Zoom with them, I'm Zooming all the time around with politicians around the world. So if there's anything I can do to kind of promote mindfulness in politics with politicians that you know, or indeed ministries, I'm working with a number of people that are taking mindfulness into the departments of finance in the Netherlands. A lovely woman who wants to take mindfulness into diplomacy from Finland, mindfulness in the United Kingdom departments, mindfulness in Wales for senior civil servants, mindfulness for the National Training College for civil servants in Croatia. So there's all of these great initiatives going on around the world. And if you want me to talk to any of your politicians or civil servants, give them a sprinkling of best practice from around the world, and I am willing to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everyone. With this, we will end the webinar for today. All right. Thank you so much for being here.